Undercover CEO goes to order at his own restaurant, stops cold when he hears two boys behind him. I swear that Mr. Luciano probably eats gold-plated pasta in his mansion, the young voice hissed. Mom said he's a thief, a total fraud. He built this whole place on her recipes, then tossed her out like yesterday's trash. His younger brother added, "Yeah, Liam, Mom cries about it sometimes. Says he ruined her." What happened when the CEO confronted this shocking accusation? Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and listen to the full, incredible story of exposure, regret, and redemption. The aroma of garlic and simmering tomatoes, usually a comforting balm to Michael Luciano's soul, did little to soothe the knot tightening in his stomach. It was Friday night at the original Luciano's, the flagship Italian eatery in downtown Chicago that had launched his culinary empire. Disguised in a worn baseball cap, a faded band t-shirt, and jeans he hadn't touched in years, he stood in the bustling takeout line, a carefully cultivated anonymity as shield. He was just another face in the crowd, a ghost in his own machine, here to observe the unvarnished truth of his operations. The line shuffled forward. He was next. Then, the words, sharp and venomous, sliced through the din from directly behind him. I swear that Mr. Luciano probably eats gold-plated pasta in his mansion. A young voice, thin but laced with a surprising bitterness, hissed. Mom said he's a thief, a total fraud. He built this whole place on her recipes, then tossed her out like yesterday's trash. Michael froze, his hand halfway to his wallet. Every muscle tensed. It felt as if the warm, fragrant air had been sucked from the room, replaced by an icy dread. He didn't dare turn, didn't dare breathe. A thief? Fraud? The accusations, raw and personal, echoed in the cavernous space of his mind, far louder than the clatter of plates and the jovial chatter of diners. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drummer heralding a disaster he hadn't seen coming. The voice continued, closer now, a second, younger boy chiming in, "Yeah, Liam, Mom cries about it sometimes. Says he ruined her. That's why we gotta eat mac and cheese from a box all the time." Michael's breath caught. The casual cruelty of the children's assessment, the matter-of-fact pain in their words, struck him with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't some disgruntled ex-employee airing grievances online. This was raw, unfiltered, and happening 3 feet behind him. Michael Luciano, at 48, was the polished, celebrated face of Luciano Hospitality Group, a sprawling enterprise with fine dining establishments, boutique hotels, and upscale catering services across the nation. His story was the American dream writ large. The grandson of Italian immigrants, he transformed his family's modest neighborhood trattoria into a multi-million-dollar brand synonymous with quality and authentic Italian cuisine. He was a fixture in Forbes, a sought-after speaker on entrepreneurship, a man who, by all external measures, had it all. His days were typically a whirlwind of strategic meetings in sleek corporate offices, negotiations with investors, and photo ops with celebrity chefs. He lived in a sprawling penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, drove a vintage Alfa Romeo, and his suits were tailored in Milan. Yet, beneath the veneer of success, Michael harbored a restless need to connect with the roots of his enterprise. The original Luciano's, or Luciano's on Rush as locals called it, was more than just his first restaurant. It was his heart. He'd learned to cook at his Nana's side, her handwritten recipes the sacred texts of his childhood. This restaurant, with its exposed brick, checkered tablecloths, and the ever-present scent of baking bread, was a tribute to that legacy. It was why 3 or 4 times a year he shed the CEO's skin and became Mike, a random customer. These incognito visits weren't just for quality control, checking if the pasta was perfectly al dente or the service up to snuff. They were his way of touching the soul of his business, of ensuring the magic hadn't been diluted by scale and spreadsheets. Lately, however, a subtle disquiet had been growing within him. Customer feedback had become slightly more inconsistent. A few trusted, long-term managers had retired, replaced by younger, data-driven executives who spoke more of profit margins than passion. There was a creeping sense that the family feel he'd prided himself on was eroding, replaced by a more impersonal corporate efficiency. He worried the company was becoming too much group and not enough Luciano. He'd even initiated a company-wide Back to Basics campaign, urging a renewed focus on customer experience and employee engagement. Tonight's visit was part of that personal commitment, a way to see if the message was truly resonating at the ground level, in the place where it all began. He had expected to find minor operational flaws, perhaps a lapse in service, or a new dish that wasn't quite hitting the mark. He had not expected an indictment of his entire character, delivered by children. The ordinary world he inhabited was one of control, of carefully managed narratives and strategic planning. He was accustomed to problems he could analyze, dissect, and solve with a well-thought-out business plan. This, however, was different. This felt personal, a direct assault on his integrity, the very foundation upon which he believed he had built his life and his business. The casual, damning words from behind him suggested a hidden, festering wound he had been utterly oblivious to, a narrative running counter to everything he projected and believed himself to be. The boys' voices, though hushed, carried clearly to Michael. The older one, Liam, sounded about 13 or 14, his tone saturated with a weary anger that was unsettling in someone so young. He got rich off Mom's marinara, her focaccia, even the tiramisu. She developed all the signature stuff when this place was tiny. Then, poof, he got big, and she got nothing. Worse than nothing. He made sure no one else in Chicago would hire her. The younger boy, Ethan, perhaps 10 or 11, his voice trembling slightly, added, "Mom says he has a black heart. She says Michael Luciano destroyed her career. That's why she works 2 jobs now and still." His voice trailed off, the unspoken hardship hanging heavy in the air. Michael stood rooted to the spot, the festive noise of the restaurant fading to a dull roar in his ears. Mom's marinara, her focaccia. Vague, fragmented images flickered at the edge of his memory. A woman, younger, with flour dusting her dark hair, a passionate argument in the old kitchen, something about recipe ownership. He'd been so consumed with expansion back then, with securing loans, scouting new locations, hiring a corporate team. He had delegated much of the day-to-day of the original restaurant to his then general manager and a head chef he'd brought in to systematize things. Could something so terrible have happened under his nose? Could he have been so blind, so negligent? The cashier called, "Next," jolting him. He turned slowly, feigning a casual glance around, as if looking for someone. He saw them then. 2 boys, small for their age, dressed in clean but well-worn clothes. Liam, the older, had a defiant set to his jaw, his eyes scanning the restaurant with an almost proprietary resentment. Ethan clutched a crumpled $5 bill, his gaze fixed on the pastry display with a longing that twisted Michael's gut. They looked hungry, not just for food, but for something more. Justice, perhaps. A cold wave of nausea washed over him. His carefully constructed world, his self-perception as a fair, if demanding, businessman, teetered on the brink. He had to know. He couldn't walk away from this. The casual cruelty of the overheard accusation was one thing. The quiet desperation in their young faces was another entirely. He stepped up to the counter, his voice hoarse as he ordered a small black coffee he didn't want. His mind raced. Who was their mother? What was her name? How could he find out more without alarming anyone? His initial goal crystallized with a painful clarity: uncover the truth, no matter how ugly. He paid for his coffee and found an inconspicuous table in the corner, one that offered a view of the boys. They were pooling their money, counting coins. They ordered a single slice of cheese pizza and 2 small lemonades. As they ate, Liam picked off the pepperoni from his half, handing it to Ethan. The gesture of brotherly care, juxtaposed with their earlier bitterness, deepened Michael's unease. He watched them, his coffee growing cold, the weight of their words settling upon him like a physical burden. This wasn't just about business. This was about lives potentially damaged, a family suffering, possibly because of him. The thought was unbearable. The moment the boys left the restaurant, Michael abandoned his coffee and made a discreet call to Sarah Jenkins, his current VP of Human Resources. "Sarah, I need you to do a deep dive into our employee record from about 15, maybe 16 years ago. Specifically for the original Lucianos on Rush. I'm looking for a female chef, possibly Italian-American, who would have been instrumental in developing some of our early signature dishes." He kept his voice carefully neutral, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "Any particular reason, Michael?" Sarah asked, her tone professionally curious. "Just reviewing some historical brand development," he lied, the words feeling like ash in his mouth. "Focus on anyone who left under potentially contentious circumstances or who might have had grievances related to recipe development." The initial search proved frustrating. 15 years was a long time. Employee records were less digitized then, and turnover in the restaurant industry was notoriously high. Several names came up, but none immediately jogged his memory in a significant way. He cross-referenced names with old supplier invoices, early marketing materials, anything that might spark a connection. The name Angela Rossi appeared on a few old kitchen schedules, listed as a lead line cook. It wasn't a name that screamed mastermind of his core recipes. He decided his next step was to contact Mark O'Connell, the general manager of Luciano's on Rush during that period. Mark had retired to Florida 5 years ago, but they kept in touch sporadically. Reaching Mark was another hurdle. His old number was disconnected. Michael tasked his executive assistant with tracking him down, a task that took 2 days of sifting through alumni networks and social media. When Michael finally got Mark on the phone, the retired manager sounded wary. "Michael Luciano, to what do I owe the honor?" Michael tried to keep it light. "Mark, just doing a bit of a historical review. I was trying to remember some of the key culinary talents from the early days at Rush Street. Specifically, anyone who had a major hand in creating those first signature dishes, like the marinara and the focaccia." There was a pause. "Well," Mark said slowly, "there were a few. We had that consultant chef for a while, Pierre Dubois, but he was more about French technique. For the real Italian heart, there was a young woman, Angela. Angela Moretti. No, wait. Rossi. Angela Rossi. Fiery girl, passionate. Definitely had a magic touch with the basics. Nana's kitchen kind of talent." Angela Rossi. Michael repeated, the name clicking faintly. "What happened to her?" Mark sighed. "That was a messy situation, Michael. If I recall, she and David Keller. You remember David, the executive chef you brought in to standardize the kitchens? They clashed. Big time. Angela claimed he was taking credit for her recipes, changing them for the worse, she said. David maintained she was insubordinate, not a team player. It got pretty ugly. She left, or was let go. I think David painted her as difficult to work with." "Difficult?" Michael pressed. "Did you believe that?" Another pause. "Honestly, Michael, David had your ear back then. You were focused on expansion, on building the brand. He was your guy on the ground, streamlining operations. Angela was emotional, old school. She didn't play the corporate game. But could she cook? Absolutely. Some of those original dishes that put Luciano's on the map? I'd bet my pension they came from her heart and hands. The confirmation, even couched in hazy memories, hit Michael hard. He had delegated, trusted, and moved on. Had he inadvertently allowed an injustice, a theft of creativity and livelihood? The stakes were no longer just about his conscience. They were about the very integrity of the Luciano name. If Angela Rossi was the mother of those two boys, then their accusations weren't just childish resentment. They were a reflection of a genuine, deep-seated wound. He needed to find Angela Rossi. Sarah's HR team, with a name and a more specific time frame, redoubled their efforts. They found a last known address in a working-class suburb west of Chicago and a decade-old forwarding request to an address in Pilsen, a predominantly Latino neighborhood. There were no recent records, no social media presence under that name that seemed to fit. Angela Rossi, it seemed, had all but vanished from the system, at least the parts of it Michael's corporate machine could easily access. Armed with a Pilsen address, a faded printout from an old HR file, Michael drove himself, not in the Alfa Romeo, but in a nondescript company sedan. The neighborhood was a vibrant tapestry of colorful murals, bustling taquerias, and small, family-run businesses a world away from his downtown high-rise. The address led him to a narrow, three-story apartment building, its brick facade showing its age. There was no Rossi on the mailboxes. He was about to give up when he noticed a small, slightly worn community notice board near the entrance. Tacked among flyers for local events and services was a neatly handwritten index card. Angela's authentic Italian catering. Small batches, big heart. Lasagnas, sauces, breads. Call Angela. Phone number. His own heart lurched. Could it be her? He dialed the number, his palms sweating. A woman answered on the third ring, her voice wary, with a hint of the Chicago accent he remembered from his own family. "Hello. Is this Angela, the caterer?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Michael. I got your number from a community board. I'm interested in your Italian catering." He felt like a fraud, but he needed to see her to talk to her. They arranged to meet at a small coffee shop in the neighborhood the next afternoon. Michael arrived early, choosing a table by the window. When she walked in, he knew instantly. She was older, lines of worry and fatigue etched around her eyes and mouth. Her dark hair, now streaked with gray and pulled back in a simple ponytail. But the fire was still there in her dark, direct gaze. She was Angela Rossi. "Mr. Luciano," she said, her voice flat, devoid of surprise, but heavy with a weary recognition. She hadn't used the name Michael. She knew who he was. The catering route, "Angela," he began, standing. "Thank you for meeting me." "Why are you here?" she asked, not sitting, her arms crossed. "Come to see how the other half lives? Or maybe you need a new recipe to steal?" The bitterness in her voice was a physical blow. "No," he said, his carefully prepared words deserting him. I overheard something. At my restaurant. Some boys your sons, I think. Liam and Ethan." Angela's expression flickered from defiance to a fierce maternal protectiveness. "What about my sons? Have you been bothering them?" "No, not at all. They were just talking. About you. About what happened." He saw the fight drained from her, replaced by a profound sadness. She finally sat down, her shoulders slumping. "So, you finally heard," she said quietly. "Took you long enough." And then the story poured out of her. She spoke of her passion for cooking, the joy of developing those early recipes for Luciano's when it was just a neighborhood joint, the long hours, the camaraderie. When she protested, he marginalized her, calling her difficult, uncooperative. He told you I was a troublemaker, didn't he? She asked, her eyes searching his. And you believed him. It was easier. You were building an empire. What was one little cook from the old neighborhood? She recounted being forced out, the humiliation, the quiet blacklisting David orchestrated. Every door I knocked on, every chef I knew, suddenly, no one would touch me. Heard you were trouble, Angela. Luciano's got a long reach. My reputation was ruined. She'd been forced to take low-paying jobs, eventually starting her tiny, word-of-mouth catering service just to make ends meet, to feed her boys. I lost my career, my passion, my name, because of you, Michael. Because you didn't care enough to see. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding or a minor corporate oversight. This was a life derailed, a family deeply scarred. The boys in the restaurant weren't just angry. They were living the consequences of his ambition and his blindness. His initial goal of just finding out the truth felt pathetically inadequate. He knew, with chilling certainty, that he couldn't walk away from this. This was his mess to clean up, his responsibility. The point of no return had been crossed the moment he'd heard those boys' voices, but Angela's story cemented it. This was no longer about protecting his brand. It was about restoring a life. The coffee shop air felt thick with unspoken accusations and years of Angela's pain. Michael finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse. Angela, I am so profoundly sorry. There are no excuses for what happened, for my failure to see, to listen. I was ambitious, yes, but that doesn't forgive the damage caused. I can only imagine how hollow an apology sounds after all this time, but I mean it. Angela looked at him, her eyes still guarded, but a flicker of something. Surprise? In their depths. Sorry doesn't pay the bills that piled up, mister. Luciano. It does. I know, Michael said quietly. And I don't expect it to. But I want to try and make things right. Not just with words. He hesitated, then plunged ahead. First, I want to offer you full, public credit for every recipe you developed for Luciano's. The marinara, the focaccia, the tiramisu, all of them. We'll revise our menus, our website, our history. Your name will be there. She stared at him. Public credit? Yes. And second, I want to offer you a position. Not just any position. I want you to come back to Luciano Hospitality Group as a consulting executive chef, focusing on recipe integrity and new concept development, with a salary and benefits package that reflects your talent and compensates for the past. He also mentioned a significant lump sum for damages, an amount that made her eyes widen slightly. Angela was silent for a long moment, processing. And David Keller? She finally asked, her voice tight. David hasn't worked for the company for several years now, Michael said. But I will be investigating his conduct thoroughly. What he did was unethical and caused irreparable harm. He made a mental note to have his legal team look into any possible contractual clauses Keller might have violated, even years later, and to ensure Keller's reputation within the industry accurately reflected his actions, if possible. Over the next few weeks, Michael began the arduous process of regrouping and formulating a concrete plan. His first act was a confidential meeting with his core leadership team and legal counsel. He laid out the situation bluntly, omitting no uncomfortable detail of his own past negligence. There was initial shock, some concern from the CFO about financial implications and potential legal exposure if Angela decided to sue beyond his offer, and worried queries from PR about managing the narrative. But Michael was resolute. This isn't about damage control, he stated firmly. This is about doing the right thing, period. The financial and reputational costs of not addressing this honestly are far greater. He directed HR to create the new consulting executive chef role, tailored to Angela's strengths, ensuring it had real authority. He had his legal team draft a comprehensive settlement and employment agreement for Angela, one that included substantial back pay, damages, and a generous ongoing salary, as well as fully funded college education trusts for Liam and Ethan. The most challenging part was rebuilding trust with Angela. She was, understandably, deeply skeptical. They met several more times, sometimes with her sons present. Liam remained openly hostile at first, his young face a mask of resentment. Ethan was quieter, watching Michael with an unnerving perceptiveness. Michael didn't try to rush them. He answered their questions honestly, even the painful ones. He spoke of his own regrets, not as excuses, but as acknowledgments of his failings. He brought them to the original Luciano's after hours one evening, walking Angela through the kitchen, a place she hadn't set foot in for over a decade. He saw a flicker of the old passion in her eyes as she touched the familiar steel countertops, her fingers instinctively checking the settings on an old dough mixer. It was a long, slow process, but gradually he felt a thaw in her reserve, a tentative willingness to believe that his offer was genuine. Michael's plan to integrate Angela back into Luciano Hospitality Group and publicly acknowledge her contributions began to take shape, but it was fraught with challenges. The first major hurdle was the internal reaction. While his immediate leadership team was now on board, albeit nervously, news of Angela's impending return and the reasons behind it trickled down, causing ripples of unease. Some long-term employees who remembered David Keller as a decisive, if somewhat abrasive, leader were skeptical. Whispers of opening old wounds and unnecessary risk reached Michael's ears. He addressed this head-on in a company-wide town hall, stating unequivocally his commitment to rectifying a past injustice and emphasizing that integrity was non-negotiable. Confronting the legacy of David Keller was another test. Keller, now a moderately successful restaurant consultant in another state, was contacted by Michael's legal team regarding his conduct. Predictably, Keller denied any wrongdoing, claiming Angela Rossi was a disgruntled former employee with an inflated sense of her own contributions. He even subtly threatened to make things unpleasant if Michael pursued this. Michael, however, had gathered corroborating statements from Mark O'Connell and two other former kitchen staffers from that era, who, emboldened by Michael's new stance, came forward to confirm Angela's version of events. While direct legal action against Keller after so many years was complex, Michael ensured that Keller's professional network would become aware of the substantiated claims against him, effectively tarnishing the reputation Keller had built. The most delicate negotiations were with Angela herself. She agreed in principle to the role and the public acknowledgement, but the emotional toll was immense. There were days she doubted her ability to return to an environment that had caused her so much pain. Liam, though slowly softening, still harbored a deep-seated anger. One evening, during a tense dinner Michael had arranged with Angela and her sons, Liam finally exploded. "So you just waltz back in, Mom? After he let that Keller guy destroy you? What if it happens again? What if this is all just some PR stunt for him?" Michael looked directly at the boy. "Liam," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I understand your anger, and you're right to be skeptical. I failed your mother. I failed your family. Words are cheap, but I give you my personal guarantee, not as a CEO, but as a man, that I will spend the rest of my career ensuring your mother is honored, respected, and that something like this can never happen again in my company. This isn't a PR stunt. This is about setting things right, no matter how uncomfortable it is." It was a raw, vulnerable admission, and it seemed to reach Liam in a way the corporate apologies hadn't. The final preparations involved planning a significant press event at the original Luciano's. Michael decided against a quiet, internal acknowledgement. Angela's story, and the company's correction of its past, needed to be told openly. He engaged a respected food journalist from the Chicago Tribune, giving her full access to Angela, himself, and the corroborating witnesses, ensuring the story would be told fairly and comprehensively. He also planned to unveil new menus and a legacy wall in the restaurant, prominently featuring Angela Rossi as the creative force behind Luciano's most beloved dishes. As the date of the event approached, the tension was palpable. Success seemed within reach, but Michael knew that one misstep, one insincere gesture, could shatter the fragile trust he had painstakingly begun to build. This was his ultimate test, to prove that his transformation was real, and that Luciano's could indeed become a place of true integrity. The main dining room of the original Luciano's buzzed, not just with the usual Friday night crowd, but with an undercurrent of anticipation. Media vans were parked outside, and several prominent Chicago food critics and journalists were scattered amongst the guests. Michael stood at a makeshift podium near the newly unveiled legacy wall, a tasteful display featuring historical photos of the restaurant and, at its center, a large, warm portrait of a younger Angela Rossi, flower on her cheek, smiling broadly. Michael tapped the microphone, a hush falling over the room. "Good evening, everyone. For nearly 30 years, Luciano's has been a part of Chicago's culinary fabric. We've prided ourselves on authentic flavors and a welcoming spirit. But tonight isn't just about celebrating our history. It's about acknowledging it fully and honestly." His voice was steady, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Angela, who stood nearby with Liam and Ethan, both boys looking nervous but proud. "For too long," Michael continued, "a vital part of our story, a foundational talent, was overlooked and wronged. The true heart and soul behind many of Luciano's most iconic dishes, our signature marinara, the focaccia you all love, our classic tiramisu, was a gifted chef named Angela Rossi." He gestured towards her. Angela poured her heritage and her genius into this kitchen in its earliest days. Due to a failure of leadership on my part and the unethical actions of another, her contributions were not only uncredited, but her career was unjustly derailed. He paused, the silence in the room absolute. "Today we begin to right that wrong. Angela, on behalf of Luciano Hospitality Group, and for me personally, I offer our deepest, most sincere apology. We are immensely proud to announce Angela Rossi is rejoining our family as consulting executive chef, where her creativity will once again shape our kitchens. Her name and her story will now rightfully take their place in Luciano's legacy." He stepped aside and beckoned Angela to the podium. She approached, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She took a deep breath. "Thank you, Michael," she began, her voice trembling slightly before gaining strength. "For many years, I believed this day would never come. To have my work acknowledged, to be seen, it means more than I can say. This isn't just about recipes, it's about respect, about truth." She looked at her sons, and it's for them, to show them that even when things seem impossible, justice can prevail. A wave of applause, warm and sustained, filled the restaurant. Liam put an arm around his mother's shoulder, and even Ethan was beaming. For Michael, watching them, it was a moment of profound, painful, and ultimately redemptive clarity. The cost had been high, but the truth finally was being served. The aftermath of the announcement was transformative, not just for Angela, but for the entire Luciano Hospitality Group. The Chicago Tribune article, published a few days later, was fair and detailed, painting a picture of corporate failing, but also of genuine remorse and a commitment to restitution. It sparked a broader conversation in the city's restaurant scene about intellectual property, kitchen culture, and the treatment of culinary professionals. Angela Rossi, no longer a ghost from the past, threw herself into her new role with vigor. She didn't just reclaim her old recipes. She refined them, innovated and mentored young chefs, infusing the Luciano brand with a renewed authenticity and passion. The Angela's Classics section on the menu became the restaurant's bestseller. Liam and Ethan, with their college funds secured and their mother finally happy and respected in her work, began to shed the bitterness that had shadowed their youth. Liam even took a summer job as a busboy at Luciano's, his initial skepticism replaced by a grudging respect for Michael and a burgeoning interest in the family business. Michael Luciano changed too. The experience had been a harsh lesson in leadership, humility, and the human cost of unchecked ambition. He became a more present and empathetic CEO, implementing new policies for employee grievance, intellectual property protection for chefs, and transparent communication. He spent less time in boardrooms and more time in his restaurant kitchens, listening to his staff. The Back to Basics campaign took on a new, deeper meaning. Several months later, on a quiet Tuesday evening, Michael sat at a corner table in the original Luciano's, not undercover, but as himself. Angela joined him, bringing over 2 plates of a new pasta dish she was developing. Liam, on his break, came by with a pitcher of iced tea. They talked and laughed, the easy camaraderie a world away from the tension of their first pain meetings. "You know," Angela said, watching Liam expertly clear a nearby table, "I never thought I'd set foot in here again without feeling that old anger. But now it feels like home again." Michael smiled. "It always should have been, Angela. You helped build this home." He knew the journey of redemption was ongoing, but looking at Angela, vibrant and fulfilled, and at her sons, their futures bright, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't realized he'd lost. From the overheard words of 2 hurt children in a takeout line, a painful truth had emerged, leading not to ruin, but to a hard one and far more valuable reconciliation.